Hello and welcome everybody to another one of the entrepreneurial skills sessions. Today we are finishing off the Techstars Entrepreneurs Toolkit. My name is Joseph Lanzillotta. I am the Student Entrepreneurship Program Manager for Tangent, Trinity's Ideas Workspace, and this is a part of Tangent TV, which is our online space on our YouTube channel where we can share out things that are going on in the entrepreneurial ecosystem or happening in Tangent. It's just our way of getting the word out to everybody about what's going on. So today is the final installment. If you missed the first 17, you can go back and look at them on our YouTube channel, but it's the final one of exploring the Techstars Entrepreneurs Toolkit, as you see above me here. So as we've done in the past ones, as we're going to do today, what we do is we go through a number of the videos, watch them, and the toolkit is really cool in that it has a workshop afterwards that we will look through. The idea with this is that I'm going through along with you guys to understand and find the value within this content, and hopefully you guys have some things to say about it as we go through. You can pop any questions or comments or feedback or anything you have into the chat. I will read it and I'll see if I can kind of start a conversation around it. Otherwise, we're here to enjoy and absorb some really good content. Today's topic number 18, is one of the most important and topical ones of today, I'd say, which is building a diverse workforce. So diversity, inclusion is hugely important, but it's also hugely valuable to companies. And this is something that is going to be gone through in this worksheet, and then there's in the workshops, and then will be exercises afterwards on how you can make your company a bit more diverse, or how you can aim towards setting diversity metrics and these sorts of things. So without further ado, I'm going to start off by reading the little brief that we have at the top, and then we'll get into it. So, committing to diversity, equity, and inclusion is an ongoing commitment that includes training, leadership, uncovering unconscious bias, and growing your business. Whether you're a bootstrapped or VC-backed company, there are actions you can take to begin the entrepreneur's journey to diversity. Jason Thompson, diversity, equity, and inclusion expert, offers his guidance and actionable steps for founders who want to build a diverse workforce but don't know where to start. With more than 20 years of experience, Jason applied his expertise in diversity, equity, and inclusion, community outreach, program management, strategic planning, and public relations to this Techstars resource. Within this module, you'll learn how diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts can help boost growth, generate a higher return on investment, and retain employees. Jason uses the 4 pillars of founders' commitment developed by Capper Capital to show how to collect data, recruit diverse candidates, remove unconscious biases, developing diversity inclusion plans, and more. So there is a lot packed into this. They are rather short videos, aside from one that's a bit longer. I'll break up some time for us to chat in between, but otherwise we're going to dive into it. So today we start with the trailer right here, so we will watch the trailer.
Today is the entrepreneur's journey to diversity. It's not what you do in one day. And a lot of times when it comes to diversity and inclusion, people think, oh, I just check the box and we move forward. And in fact, it's a commitment that you have to make, and it's a journey. What does it mean to be diverse? It means you just look like the country or the world you live in. When people feel included, they'll speak up, and that's important. And that's why there's tension when you have diversity, because when people feel empowered to speak up, it means they're going to challenge what you think, and that's going to be important. And you're going to need that to have a successful company. What's the ROI on diversity? Why should we do this? We know that gender diverse companies typically perform better, and racially and ethnically diverse companies also perform better. And usually people always ask me, like, what should I do? And I tell people, you should work on yourself. It's okay to do the right thing because it is the right thing.
I love that. It is okay to do the right thing just because it is the right thing. Oftentimes in the world of entrepreneurship, it's always has to be mapped. And he does say it is mapped to a metric. Companies will do better, but just to do the right thing because it's the right thing is a massively important thing. So 4 videos we're going through today, and then we'll go into do the exercises, which is just there. So introduction to diversity, equity, and inclusion, building tomorrow's company, commit to the world you live in, and hiring a diverse workforce. And then, as I said, we will go to the exercises at the end. So the first video we're jumping into is introduction to diversity, equity, and inclusion. This video will introduce you to diversity, inclusion, and equity in the workforce. Building a diverse company takes time and commitment to your future.
I am Jason Thompson. I'm Vice President for Diversity and Inclusion at Techstars. And today is the entrepreneur's journey to diversity. And the reason I think I like calling that a journey is because it's not what you do in one day. And a lot of times when it comes to diversity and inclusion, people think, oh, I just check the box and we move forward. And in fact, it's a commitment that you have to make, and it's a journey. And you're not going to be done on day one. And so today we're just going to go through a few things, hopefully help you grow your company and include diversity and inclusion as part of that.
Easy enough. It's a lot more than a box ticking exercise. So with that, part number 2, as I said, some of these are a bit shorter, some are a bit longer. Part number 2, building tomorrow's company. Having a dynamic company that prepares you for the future includes building a diverse and inclusive workforce. This section will teach why a diverse company will boost the growth and performance of your company while building tomorrow's best company.
As I mentioned, I started in education, then moved to healthcare, and then prior to coming to Techstars, I actually built the diversity inclusion program for the United States Olympic team. And the way they measure diversity and inclusion today is based on the work I did. I came up with a way to measure it. It's still used to this day. I want to say in 2016, it won a national award for innovation in diversity, because it essentially was just a quick way to measure diversity and how you're doing, and that was something that was really important to that organization. And we'll go into measuring, because I think that's important too, and we'll talk about that today. But this reminded me of a story that was told to me, that there's a university president who went to the dean of the engineering school. And the university president asked the dean of the school a very simple question. And he asked her, what's the goal of your engineering school? But as the dean, what's your goal? And the dean said, my goal is to create today's best engineer. That's what I'm going to do. And the president of the university responded with, if that's what you're doing, you're failing our students. You should not be creating today's best engineer. You should be creating tomorrow's best engineer. Because if you create today's best engineer, that engineer is dated the minute they graduate from our school. We should be preparing them for the future. And if you think about that, our diversity and inclusion work is part of that too, because you need to have a dynamic company that understands what's going on in the future and what's going to happen. And so the question I have for you is, what kind of company are you building? Are you building today's best company or tomorrow's best company? And are you thinking about diversity and inclusion when you do that? I looked at some quick population data. And this data basically looks at, in the year 2050, which country would have the highest population. And what you see is there's not one European country on that list, not one. So if you think about that, many of the largest economic centers currently are in those European countries, but that's not where the population is going to be in 2050. So what kind of company are you building? Are you building today's best company, or one that's going to be able to take advantage of that opportunity? So that should be part of the goal of our diversity and inclusion, is understand how that connects to you and connects to your company. Because you can boost your growth with diversity. And if we can help you understand how to do that, you can grow your company. So one of the things that, we typically hear these kind of things like, what's the ROI on diversity? Why should we do this? Well, one reason is we know that diverse companies have 19% higher retention. People stay. People want to stay in a company that's diverse. It's pretty simple. The other piece is we know that gender diverse companies typically perform better, and racially and ethnically diverse companies also perform better. Now, this is data that we always get, and I think there's two things about diversity. One is there's an economic reason, right? There's population change, there's companies do better. But I think another point that we don't make enough is it's okay to do the right thing because it is the right thing.
Again, he's reinstating that point. It's okay to do the right thing just because it is the right thing, despite the statistics. But the statistics are relevant and do matter in many ways. I love the, are you building today's best company or tomorrow's best company? In that way, diversity is inherently forward thinking, and it's something that I think is hugely powerful. I know he's going to go into it more. So part number 3, commit to the world you live in. One part of committing to diversity is building a company with employees that look like the world you live in. This video will give you actionable steps on how to build a diverse company via the 4 pillars of the founder's commitment developed by Capper Capital. Cool. We'll look at those 4 pillars.
We need to commit to diversity. How do we make this commitment to diversity? Well, one is we need to define what we mean by it. What does it mean to be diverse? It means you just look like the country or the world you live in. Like, you should see all those faces represented in your company. It's pretty straightforward. It doesn't mean it doesn't come without tension. It'll make you uncomfortable. And that's okay, because that's normal. Because I would also say when people feel included, they'll speak up, and that's important. And that's why there's tension when you have diversity, because when people feel empowered to speak up, it means they're going to challenge what you think, and that's going to be important. And you're going to need that to have a successful company. And we'll talk about that here in just a minute, too. But that's how those two are connected. One is you should look like the world you live in. And two, when people feel empowered, they'll speak up. And that's how you're going to grow your company. The Kapor Capital came up with some founders' commitments. And Techstars has committed to those commitments, and it's based on a simple acronym of GIVE. Goals, invest. 3 is you should volunteer and educate. And so I'll just dive a little deeper into each one of these and give you some context of how that works. So one is you should set goals. Your company should have a commitment. You should set some goals. But what should those goals be? One is commit to diversity. I know it sounds very simple, but it's actually more complicated than you think. And the reason you should commit to diversity is the way I got my last 3 jobs. As I mentioned, I've worked in healthcare, sports, Techstars, and almost every one of those companies started their diversity program the same way. What did? They decided, you know what? Diversity is important. Let's put together a committee. And then after a year, they decided, you know what? This isn't getting it done. We have a committee, but nothing's getting done. And the reason because they haven't assigned a leader. And so I realized for a lot of companies, they might say, you know what? I'm too small, can't do it. But the point is, you got to make a commitment, and you got to choose somebody to be responsible for it. And I'm sure all of you already know, if someone's not responsible for it, it does not get done. As part of your company commitment, you should collect data. Now, a lot of times people will probably think, you know, what do you mean collect data? There's only 6 of us here. I don't know why I would need any more data than that. Well, the point is you should know who your customers are just the same, right? Because one of the things you might find when you start collecting data is that, wow, we found that women hate our product, but men love it. And I look around, I'm looking at 6 guys. That might explain why your customers, maybe half the world, which are female, don't like your product, right? And so that's why it's very important to collect data. Not only should you know who's in the room, but who's consuming your product. And do they like your product? Because it could create a huge opportunity for you. You know, the world's changing. It's much more global. And you should have a company that's dynamic and take advantage of that. And by collecting your data, you know who your consumer is, right? Not only do you know who's in the room, but who are you going to sell to who's not in the room? Invest. And this is one of my favorite sayings is audio should match video. What you say should look like what you do. And so in your diversity and inclusion work, you should make sure audio matches video. And what's a simple way to do that? Compensation. We've known for years that women are underpaid. So you should just, from day one, make sure audio matches video. And how do you do that? You make sure that you can prove it. And one of the ways you prove it is just pay people fairly. And that should also be reflected in your code of conduct, in your mission, in your vision about whatever your company is, that should be reflected there. Techstars has done the same thing. We've upgraded our code of conduct, and you'll see that compensation is in there. And we did that because it was very important in my mind that audio matches video, that what you say looks like what you do. And we know in compensation, it's not just salary. In all the different forms of compensation, you should make sure that it's equitable and you can prove it. And that's a simple way to do that, because when you do that, you start building a culture of inclusion. If I feel empowered, that I've been paid fairly, I will do whatever it takes to support the company. But if I feel like, you know, from day one, they never paid me fairly, they don't, you know the rules support what they say, audio doesn't match video, it's hard to create a company of inclusion. It's hard to create a company where people will speak up when things aren't going so well. And there's a consequence for that when things aren't going so well. And we'll talk about that too. So this is how we're going to build this foundation around diversity and inclusion, how it's directly connected to the work that you're going to do and the businesses that you're building. So the other piece is volunteer. You know, if you're going to recruit from diverse communities, you should also volunteer and give back to those communities, because that's equally as important. And by doing that, you start building a diverse network. Because one of the challenges I typically find is people say, well, you know, my network's not very diverse, so it's hard for me to recruit, and I'm moving fast. Well, that's why you got to build your network all the time. And there's different ways to do that. One is you should volunteer and support. And this is what I want to point out, because this is going to lead into this unconscious bias. Because a lot of times when we talk about volunteering, we think, oh, I'll go to this poor community and we'll go save those black folks. No, it's more complicated than that. And you shouldn't be working from this stereotype. The fact of the matter is you could give back by going to a women in engineering program and be supportive there and mentoring. You could go to a minority entrepreneurs, startup weekend and volunteer there and be equally supportive. And not assume that that means, these communities are poor and I'm going to go save them. You should be disabused of that assumption. That is not what we're asking you to do. The fact of the matter is you should network and not go into any community with an assumption of what they can and cannot do. The other thing I would say is partner with organizations. I told you I came out of the university system. Almost every university in the US, every major university has a chief diversity officer. So you could just simply reach out to them so that they know when you have a job opportunity, they know when you're recruiting, and that's a simple thing you can do to start diversifying your network and investing in your network. The other thing I would do to build a diverse network is I would hire a Vila. I worked at a hospital system. We had this incredible CEO, but what I loved about him is just the way he did business. And I went to Avila, who was the president of one of the hospitals, African-American woman who'd done very well. And I just remember like, how'd you get this job? Like, how'd you get into Integris? And she said, Stan recruited me years ago. She said, I was working for another hospital, a competing hospital. I was doing a presentation, and when I was done, Stan came up to me and said, you're amazing, I'm gonna hire you. She said, literally, that's how we started the conversation. She said, we exchanged cards, and she said, 3 years later, my phone rang. It was Stan. He said, I got a hospital, you're gonna be the president of it. And she said, that's pretty much how it happened. And to me, that's how you build a network. But what was interesting on top of that is the hospital she went to was in a very white suburb of Oklahoma City, probably the whitest suburb. Because the point wasn't so much that, oh, we have a diverse community, now I gotta have a minority leader. It was like, no, when I have a great leader, you can put them anywhere. And your commitment to diversity should reflect that. And that was what's so amazing about what he did and what each of you can do is as you're out and you're networking and building that network, when you see great people, just make note. That's how you build a network. That's how you find great people. So you got a network to recruit. Go find your Avila. Another thing that's simple, just go to conferences. There's a lot of conferences around issues around gender, around race, entrepreneurship, and you should be there and be visible because that's how you're gonna build your network. Because these conferences also help you educate. And that's the E in give, is like, how are you educating yourself? And so if you're out going to these events, learning, you're educating yourself, you're getting a better understanding of the different concepts around diversity and inclusion. And one of the things you're probably gonna learn about is unconscious bias. Like we hear this all the time, like unconscious bias, what does it mean? How does it impact us? And so one of the things you can do, there's a link here to the Harvard Implicit Bias website. And you can just go onto that website, you log in, and there's this little exercise you do by punching a couple keys. And typically most people go and it'll tell you if you have a racial bias or a gender bias. And almost everybody I know who's ever done it typically says, I took the test, said I had a racial bias, I don't think it's true. And I'm like, well, that's why it's called unconscious, right? Obviously you don't think it's true, or we wouldn't call it unconscious bias, right? But if you think about it, that's typically how it works. Like you don't know you have these things. But there's a sad reality too, in unconscious bias is, I took the test myself, and it said I had a bias against Black people. And I was thinking, what the hell? I've been doing diversity my whole life. I clearly am Black. How's this even possible? But then it made perfect sense if you think about it. And this is the hardest thing about raising children of color is you internalize these negative biases about yourself and you don't even know you're doing it. And so you can imagine if I have a 7-year-old, the things that go through their mind and how because if you think about it, we're consuming the same television. So if white people are getting negative images of Black people are getting them too and internalizing. And that was the hardest thing about raising my kids was to try to help them negotiate that reality of getting these negative images, internalizing it, and then how do you undo that? Very painful, as you can imagine as a parent sometimes, the conversations that I have with my kids. And unconscious bias is a major piece of that because they don't even know where it comes from, and I can't explain it either. So there's a lot of work that needs to be done in this space. At least the first thing you can do is understand what biases you have because we all have them. I have this truck because it's a good example of how unconscious bias works. And this is my daughter from years ago. And I remember when we saw the truck, I looked at my wife and right away I was like, we ain't going to that event. And she agreed with me. She's like, no, we will not be going to that event right away. We both agreed, right? And then I thought, holy cow, I've been doing diversity for years. There's something going on here. I shouldn't just blurt that out, right? But because I knew there was a reason I wasn't going to go. And I got another bias too. Any country music fans in here? Raise your hand if you country music fans, okay? There's a connection I make, right? I would assume country music, if you drive that big truck, you probably don't like Black people. Right? I'm connecting those things. And I imagine many of you have made those same connections, right? Now, I would also assume when you got up this morning, you didn't go, the goal today is discrimination. I'm gonna start discriminating right now. Like no one does that, do you? Right? But typically what happened is you take a shortcut. Our unconscious biases are shortcuts through the world. And so let's assume today I decided, we need to hire another person in our diversity program. And you get that interview. And on the morning of the interview, I pull in the parking lot with my little Honda Accord. I get out and you pull in that big truck. You got that country music blaring, right? Do you think I'm gonna hire you? Yes or no? How many people think I'm gonna hire you? Probably not, right? But the reason I don't hire you isn't because I go, I'm gonna discriminate today. I start using code words. What's a big code word I use? Fit. Think about it. If there's two top candidates and you're not sure who to take, the next thing somebody's going to blurt out is, who's the best fit? Let's pick the person who fits the best. We always say that. And you don't have to define fit, but every single person in the room knows what it is. And you think it is, all that is a definition of what your biases are. And you'll start reproducing those. And so that's how our unconscious bias impacts on a daily basis the decisions we make. So it's important to know you have your biases and to start having a conversation about fit. What does fit mean? Because you're reproducing those biases. And there's a consequence for that. When people feel included, they also feel empowered to speak up. So when I worked in healthcare, I remember one of the major problems they had were medical errors. And they found this disturbing problem is that a doctor would literally be making a mistake in the emergency room or in the OR, and the nurses would see it and wouldn't say a word. And other people in the room would know that this is wrong and they would not say a word. And I remember at one point, this wasn't at our hospital when I worked in the hospital, but there was this literally star athlete at a university, and they went in to repair his ankle, and they repaired the wrong ankle. And you'd have to think, how's that possible? Because you would think you'd open it up and everything looks good, you leave it alone. But they in fact, began injuring this ankle. And so the reason fit is a cost to your company is if people don't feel like they're included and valued, they won't speak up, and they'll let you make these most horrible mistakes. And for your company, there's a cost in that. And so if you think about it, and I gave the example, there's a monster truck, and I look at my wife and I say, we ain't going to that, and she agrees with me. Think about that, right? She immediately allowed me to reproduce this bias against people I don't even know, this assumption I'm making about a truck and country music. She just helps me reproduce that. And it's not that she's a terrible person, but it's what happens when you always hire to fit. The people will never question it. If you don't empower your employees to feel included, they won't speak up, they won't challenge it. And I would argue, no matter what the size of your company is, you can't afford that kind of mistake. You can't have a room full of people who all just nod their head at you, never feel empowered to question what you're going to do and what's happening in the organization.
Really powerful. It's really interesting how he talks about it. It's like you want your employees or the people that you work with to challenge you because that's going to make you better off. It's something that we talk about a lot, but again, he goes into the idea of like make the video match the audio. I love that as an analogy. He did mention the idea of volunteering, and he also mentioned Techstars. So they have startup weekends. I mentioned in the previous one for anybody who wasn't there. I'm just going to pop it in the chat here for you guys. This upcoming weekend. There's a Techstars startup weekend. It's for trying to come up with ideas around the COVID-19 crisis. If you want to get involved, if you're interested, go through that link by all means. And I'd love to see you there. I'm going to be volunteering my time, so I'll be a mentor on the program. So I'd hope to see a number of you there. Also, I'm going to put another link in there. He did mention the implicit bias test, so I'm going to pop that in there as well. If anybody wants to take the test, I'm really interested to hear what sort of feedback you have on it. I'm going to go and take it myself, and we shall see. But it's really interesting that the idea of fit equals bias without you even thinking about it. So some things to take with you. I love that at the end of this, there is actually a worksheet to kind of go through because it kind of structures it a bit more than the theory. But without further ado, we're going to do the last little session. I don't think it's a very long one. And then we'll go into the actual worksheet at the end. So part number 4, hiring a diverse workforce. Using code words like fit, could inhibit hiring diverse candidates. This video provides recruiting methods and can help level the playing field and address unconscious bias during the recruiting process. Cool.
Typically, your hiring process reflect your fit, but there's a way actually to overcome it, and it's basically 4 to 50. There's some research to show that if you have 4 candidates, 1 female and 3 men, the odds of you hiring that female are 0. Chances are you will not hire that woman, which sounds ridiculous. But what they found is if you have 2 women and 2 men and simply balance that, the odds of you hiring a female, 50%, which means no one's getting an advantage. That's what it should be. So that's one way you can actually overcome your own bias is just by changing how you do your interview process. Because many times interview processes reflect bias. A lot of times people like to implement processes that make them feel comfortable. You know, we go to dinner, and when you think about it, if you take a candidate to dinner, all you're really doing is trying to find out, are we the same? Right? It doesn't ever have to do anything what their skills are. You're just trying to see, can they mirror my behavior? And the better they do it, you're more apt to hire them. It's just a function of fit and reproducing your own bias. And that's why it's important to use some things that help you overcome that, because a lot of times you don't realize when you're doing it. A lot of times we think about diversity and inclusion like it's a place or we just check the box. But if you think about it, your marketing, you'll be doing marketing for the entirety of your company. You'll be doing your accounting. And it's the same concept. You got to commit to it because it doesn't just happen in one day and it's complicated. Because, the thing is you might find, wow, we have this gender diversity, but we have no Latinx people in our organization. That would tell us something. Or we have no footprint in another country. That all those things are part of the diversity and they're complicated, none of which are all going to happen on the same day. And so it's a journey that you have to keep at and realize that you don't get to check a box. It's just the work that you have to do to be successful. And so I just want to end with just kind of a reminder of what the concepts are. One is just set goals, establish, what do you look like? Collect your data. What does your customer base look like? How are you reaching them? That's a good place to start. Another is invest in people. And that means salaries too. A lot of times we think, invest in people because we have great benefits, but it should make sure everybody has equal access to those benefits. Whether they're LGBTQ or African-American, that you have a process that is treating people fairly, they feel empowered, included. Again, volunteer, but don't volunteer based on what your assumption is about that community. Don't take that in there with you. And the way you kind of overcome that is educate, that you make sure that you're educating yourself, you understand about unconscious bias, you have some appreciation for the communities that you're going to, and some of your own biases are important.
All right, so some interesting takeaways, some interesting things you might be able to implement if you are in a position of hiring. If you're not in a position of hiring people, I think this is something that you can kind of take away and potentially apply to whatever it is that you're working on, whatever it is that you're doing, whenever you're building teams. There are a lot of ways to ensure diversity and inclusion, and these are just some of them. I'm going to go into the worksheet here just to see. It does very much mirror what was talked about. His line off the top, I love the "it's okay to do the right thing because it is the right thing." Just because it's the right thing, you don't have to get something out of it. Just because it's the right thing to do, you can do it. And that's a wonderful way to look at things. So this is a way to start. Who will you assign as the person who's going to take care of your diversity and inclusion in whatever organization you're working in, or whatever group or whatever team you're building? Who is in charge of it? If nobody's in charge of it, it's less than likely to get done, as he said, and then you're trying to build a company that reflects the diversity you see in the world. And that's a really good way of looking at it. What you see in the world is what you should aim to mirror in your company, because, as he said, for the business side, it does broaden the potential of who you might be able to reach as a customer, but also for the sake of outcome and for the sake of being able to be challenged in your organization, making sure that everybody from a diverse background feels comfortable is a really good way of helping you move forward. And then we go on to the give model. So this is the goals, invest, volunteer, educate. Those are the four pillars as was laid out. That is essentially the worksheet to go through. So it has a bit of a description here of what they are. So some of the goals you might establish, you can start to establish those goals by looking at employees, customer base, mentors, board, advisors. Those would be the areas. And it also has a layout here for some of the questions that you can ask and have people kind of fill those out. And as he said, no matter how big or small your team is, this is something that can be useful as an exercise to understand your team, but also you can put this outward to understand your customers. And if your customers end up matching almost exactly your team, there may be a question to ask there around, are we reaching everyone we could potentially reach, or are we just creating a product for ourselves and missing out an entire market opportunity that we haven't even thought of? So a bit more to go there. Then the invest, make sure that you're investing in your people, investing in diversity and equity and inclusion. So here are some of the tick boxes you can go through. Are we paying people fairly? If we go down a bit more, are we creating a reporting tool? If you're not reporting and keeping the metrics, if it's not measured, it can't be improved. All the way down, we reviewed the leaning.org leanin.org 50 ways to fight bias activities video series, and use the card activity to train employees. So there's another place you guys can go if you want to check it out, the leanin.org 50 ways to fight bias. If you want to go a bit deeper on this, that is a great place to go. And then we keep on going down. Volunteer, this is what I mentioned. I have it in the chat there, the Techstars Startup Weekend. That's just the next one. They're happening continuously. If you want to volunteer as a mentor, as a helper, there are loads of opportunities to do that. Potentially this one's going to be digital, so it's going to be an interesting take. Even if you want to join as a participant, I think it's a great opportunity. And then we keep going on. These are kind of our company has networked to recruit through. Here are some opportunities to network and recruit. Here are some places you might go. And then educate. It's about continuously upskilling. So this is the, you can look at the other link I put in the description, or sorry, in the chat there, the harvard.edu implicit bias test. You can actually check your implicit bias. It's really interesting to look at something you might not even know is a challenge. So it's something to look at. And then you can take the test here. They actually have the link. So if you do go to the Techstars Entrepreneurial Toolkit at any point, you can find that link there, or come back to this video. You're more than welcome to. And then the idea of fit, breaking that down, some of the tools he said, and then remember, before you decide on a candidate, here are some things to look at, so some things to check back into as you're doing your hiring. 50 ways to fight bias, people and culture toolkit. There are a number of things you can go for. These are actually links, so you can go directly to them here. If you go into the toolkit, the link is in the description of this video to the Techstars toolkit, and then you can navigate your way through. And then finally, there is the give worksheet at the bottom of it. So if you wanted to actually implement this in your organization, in a group you're working in, here is the worksheet to go through goals, invest, volunteer, and educate. And that is your output from the day to ensure, or at least start working towards, because as he said, it's a continuing process, working towards being inclusive and ensuring diversity across your organization, across your team, across whatever it is that you're working in. Because as he said, it improves outcomes, it improves comfortability of people, it allows people to challenge you and challenge each other, and in that comfortable of an environment, you are able to thrive and you will have better outcomes. You don't just want a number of yes people sitting around you as you try to solve problems or work towards something new or innovative. So with that, guys, that is essentially the content of today. I know it was a bit shorter session than normal, but